Okay, let's unpack this. We're jumping straight into a moment that really got everyone talking after the Spanish Grand Prix,
Hmm.
Max Verstappen's clash with George Russell. But, it wasn't just the incident on track.
No, not at all.
It was something Max did after the race, a comment on social media that was, well, frankly, completely out of character.
Yeah, really unusual for him.
It felt like, I don't know, the closest thing you're ever going to get to a public mea culpa from Max Verstappen.
Absolutely. And that immediate, well, later, but still quite quick reaction, it raises a big question, doesn't it?
It does.
We've been digging through analysis from F1 experts, various online discussions, trying to get a handle on it. Was this really rare moment of, let's say, regret?
Hmm.
Was it just a one-off? Yeah, born out of frustration?
Or something more.
Or does it actually point to something deeper, like a vulnerability maybe, a weakness, even in that usually rock-solid approach he has?
That's the puzzle, isn't it? So we've gathered insights from F1 blogs, analytical pieces, looking at it from all sides. The crash itself, that very strange post-race comment, the whole context building up to it.
The penalty debate, too, that got heated.
Oh, yeah. And what this whole thing might tell us about Verstappen himself, about the competition right now, and, the ongoing headache that is F1 stewarding.
So our mission here in this deep dive is really to get past the headlines.
Yeah.
We want to help you understand what was really significant about this particular moment. What does it actually reveal about a driver who, let's face it, is seen as one of the toughest, most relentless guys out there?
Ever, maybe.
Possibly. And what does it say about the pressures these drivers are under and how the sport tries to, keep things in line on track?
Exactly. So you, our listener, come join us. Let's dive into this moment that, at first glance, maybe looked like just another racing incident.
Yeah, easily dismissed.
But then it unfolds into something way more complex, more revealing, really.
Definitely a lot to unpack here, layers upon layers.
Okay, let's start with the moment itself. Spain, late in the race. Battle for position, final laps ticking down.
High pressure.
And then we see the collision. Verstappen and Russell heading into turn one. Now, turn one at Barcelona, it's a classic spot.
Oh, yeah. Big braking zone, wide entry, room on the inside if you're brave enough.
So a fight there isn't weird. But this one,
Mm-hmm.
the way it happened and what came after,
Yeah,
that was unusual.
that's right. So Russell had just made his move down the main straight, completed the pass just before they hit the brakes.
Okay.
Verstappen then tries to fight back immediately, dives to the inside for turn one, and bang, contact. The Red Bull tagged the Mercedes.
And it was Verstappen's reaction later, that social media comment that just jumped out, calling the move not right, saying flat out, it shouldn't have happened.
And this is why it blew up,
Yeah.
As the analyst pointed out, that kind of language,
Yeah.
it's vanishingly rare from Max.
Like almost non-existent.
Think about his track record. He's the master of standing his ground, defending aggressive moves, or just shrugging it off. Racing incident. Bolt to blame, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Publicly admitting fault. Using words like not right, shouldn't have happened. It's almost unheard of, especially that quickly after the flag.
It's like seeing a politician admit they were wrong. It just doesn't compute sometimes. So what did the experts reckon this signaled? What was the interpretation?
Well, a few possibilities were thrown around in the analysis. One is maybe in the heat of the moment, it just went too far, even for him, beyond his own line for aggressive but, fair racing.
Right.
Another thought, maybe more likely since it was social media a bit later, perhaps after he'd cooled off, or crucially, after talking to the team.
The debrief data.
Exactly. Engineers looking at data, onboard footage. Maybe there was just a clear realization, okay, that move, indefensible. By his own standards, maybe it was over the line.
So the closest thing to an apology we're likely to get.
Pretty much. The closest we've seen to real contrition from him about a clash he clearly started and was penalized for.
You mentioned cooling down and the difference between his immediate comments and that later post. In the media pen, right after he jumped out, he used the word misjudgment. How's that different?
Yeah, the wording is interesting, as the analysis noted, misjudgment in the pen.
Well, you could read that as him trying to explain it away, almost.
How so?
Like framing it as an error in execution. Not a deliberate bad move. I didn't mean for the contact to happen. I just misjudged the breaking point or the space.
Right, takes the sting out of it a bit. Less about intent.
Exactly. It's taking some ownership, but maybe deflecting slightly towards just a simple mistake, rather than admitting the whole move was reckless to begin with.
A technical slip-up, maybe?
Precisely, a technical misjudgment. But the social media post felt different. Not right, shouldn't have happened. That feels more fundamental.
More about the action itself. Yeah, acknowledging the decision to even try that move in that way was wrong. Regardless of the exact intent second by second, it suggests that after looking at it again, the conclusion wasn't just, oops, brake too late, but more like, that was a bad idea, full stop.
So the cool down, the data, the team chat likely led to a more complete admission.
That seems to be the consensus view, a realization he'd properly crossed the line.
Okay, so a very unusual reaction from Verstappen suggests some regret. But as the analysis widely pointed out, this wasn't just some random brain fade, was it?
No, definitely not.
Experts felt this was more like the sum of many parts, things piling up all weekend, maybe even longer, leading to what some called that red mist moment.
That's absolutely critical context highlighted across the F1 blogs and discussions we looked at. Turn 1 wasn't isolated.
Right.
It felt like the end point of a whole load of frustrations and pressures that had been building.
What kind of things, what specific factors were contributing to this pressure cooker situation?
Several key things kept coming up. First, just the immense pressure he's always under.
Even as champion.
Yeah, maybe especially as champion. He's the lead guy, expected to deliver, particularly when the car isn't, miles ahead or the competition's really tight.
Yeah.
Carrying that whole Red Bull effort. It's a heavyweight.
Okay, pressure. What else?
Second, definite disappointment with the car performance compared to what they expected.
The upgrades.
The Barcelona upgrades,
Yeah.
hyped up, but didn't seem to close that gap to McLaren as much as hoped. Didn't bring back that crushing dominance from last year or early this season.
Right.
And there was this specific angle in some analysis that Red Bull maybe thought McLaren had gained an edge through, I don't know, technical directive interpretations, only for McLaren to turn up super quick, right when Red Bull thought their upgrades would shine.
Ouch. So your boost doesn't work as planned, and the rival you thought might be pegged back is actually flying. Double whammy.
Exactly. And then you throw in the race strategy.
The tires.
Yeah. Verstappen apparently felt the strategy for that last stint, the tire choice, put him on the rev limiter. Like having to push the car and tires beyond their happy place, just to keep pace or position. Operating right at the ragged edge, super demanding, high stress.
Right.
It felt, as some experts described it, like he was being left to just salvage it all himself, drive the wheels off it just to hang on.
So
Comparisons were made to Hungary a few years back, where he felt similarly burdened by strategy.
Okay, so pressure of leading, car not quite there, strategy frustrations pushing him to the limit. That's a lot. What was the immediate trigger? The final straw before the Russell incident?
The one thing everyone highlighted was the run-in with Leclerc.
On the main straight, just before.
Yeah, just moments before the Russell clash. Verstappen was audibly, visibly annoyed. Pissed off was the term used. Believed Leclerc should get the place back.
Okay.
And right then, literally, as he's fuming about Leclerc and wanting the position back, he gets the call from the pit wall.
Saying what?
Confirming Russell, who'd just gone past, should be let go. Basically acknowledging Russell's pass was legit and he wasn't fighting him right then.
Overload.
That seemed to be it, the combination.
Right.
Still mad about Leclerc, then immediately told he's lost the place to Russell fair and square and can't fight back cleanly right away. Seemed to just tip him over.
The red mist descended.
That seems to be the narrative, the final trigger.
So it wasn't just about Russell, it was everything else culminating in that specific sequence. Which brings us to the analysis. Was it calculated defense or just losing it?
Yeah, the experts really tried to move past just deliberate or not and look at the mechanics, the mindset in that split second.
What did the data show?
Well, the data points were key. He did come off the throttle. He did brake multiple times into turn 1. His initial speed into the corner was actually relatively low compared to his peak on the straight.
Okay, so that suggests he was trying to make the corner, not just send it.
Yes, it suggests he wasn't just, flooring it and hoping. However, the critical point mentioned again and again was his speed plateauing on the way to the apex.
Instead of decreasing.
Exactly. When you're making a clean corner, especially with someone alongside, your speed should keep reducing smoothly towards the apex. His wasn't. It leveled off. And he was turning in later than you'd expect for a controlled move.
How did that compare to a, say, clean but aggressive move there? Wasn't there a Leclerc comparison? Lap 1?
Absolutely. That was used as a textbook example. Lap 1, Leclerc dived down the inside of Russell in the same corner. Hard move, but totally legit.
How so?
described as a hard but fair dive. Leclerc was fully in control, positioned perfectly, basically mugged Russell under braking, outbraked him cleanly, precisely, left Russell no option but to yield or risk contact that would have been Russell's fault.
A controlled masterclass in aggression, Verstappen'S move.
Fundamentally different. Different stage of the race, yes, different tires, sure. But the data showed Max carried way more speed to the apex than Leclerc did in that controlled move. And crucially, the analysis concluded Verstappen was entirely relying on Russell avoiding him.
Meaning his line was always going to cause contact.
If Russell stayed put, yes. Verstappen's trajectory and speed meant collision was inevitable unless Russell bailed out. It wasn't a controlled dive gone slightly wrong. It put all the responsibility on the other guy to avoid being hit.
Which, in F1, the car on the racing line doesn't have to do if the attacker isn't properly alongside or in control.
Exactly. So the analysis framed it less as a failed overtake attempt, more as lashing out.
Lashing out.
Yeah, trying to do something a little bit low, disruptive, overly aggressive, purely out of that built-up frustration from everything else. A moment where, because of all that pressure in the Leclerc trigger, he lost control. Not necessarily spinning, but control of his judgment, his precise execution. Misjudged it completely. Hit Russell.
And the red mist term came up a lot.
Widely applied.
Yeah.
That moment where judgment just goes out the window, logical thought replaced by impulse, frustration, can't think straight, can't fully control the car's nuances at the limit.
Like Vettel in Baku.
Exactly the comparison made. Vettel hitting Hamilton under the safety car in Baku 2017. Clear example of frustration leading to a, quote, ham-fisted and stupid action.
So less a calculated hit, more an uncontrolled reaction boiling over into recklessness.
That's the strong consensus, edging into, road rage territory, reacting impulsively, aggressively because you're wound up, even if the exact outcome of the crash wasn't the specific aim. The intent to do something unfair, pushy, disruptive, that was probably there due to frustration. But the outcome of hitting Russell was down to losing control, misjudging everything in that moment.
And didn't he let Russell back past pretty quickly after?
Yes, that detail was seen as really telling. After the contact, later on that same lap, Verstappen let Russell go by.
Which suggests?
Seen as a strong sign he regretted it almost instantly. Unlike other times where he's defended aggressively or had contact, where he'd fight tooth and nail to keep the spot, conceding it so quickly, here suggests a rapid, okay, that was too much. Maybe wanting to rectify it or just avoid making it worse.
That quick regret makes you wonder about the penalty. He got 10 seconds added to his time. Was that enough? Seems like that sparked a firestorm.
It certainly did. The 10-second time penalty reactions were mixed. But yeah, a lot of the analysis felt it was lenient. Pretty lenient for something like that.
What were people suggesting instead?
Well, the debate ranged from a drive-through penalty, which usually costs more time, depending on the pit lane, all the way up to much harsher calls. Nico Rosberg, for instance, suggested it warranted way more. Maybe even a black flag, disqualification, given the clear loss of control and the impact on Russell's race.
How did it stack up against that Vettel-Baku incident penalty?
Yeah, that comparison was everywhere. Vettel got a 10-second stop-go for deliberately turning into Hamilton in Baku.
Which is much worse than a time penalty.
Oh, yeah. Stop in the pits for 10 seconds, then they can work on the car. Big-time loss. Now, you could argue Vettel's intent was clearer, more deliberate maybe, than Max's red mist. But both were drivers acting out unacceptably due to frustration. The fact Max got a time addition, not a stop-go or drive-through, made many feel it was light by comparison, especially given the potential danger.
And there was that extra context about Russell's initial pass, wasn't there? Did that play into Max's mindset?
Yeah, that came up. Some analysis pointed out that where Russell actually completed the pass right on the edge of the braking zone, maybe Max's team initially questioned if Russell should give it back. Rules about completing passes off track or gaining lasting advantages.
Right.
So while that query was maybe happening, Russell pulls away slightly, then Max makes the turn one move. The rules can be a bit gray there, but some argued Russell's pass was borderline. This ambiguity, maybe Red Bull thinking Russell might have to give it back, could have added yet another layer to Max's frustration just before turn one.
But the stewards wouldn't factor that previous potential grievance into the turn one penalty, right?
No, exactly. They just judged the contact itself. But it adds context to why Max might have been particularly wound up about losing that position right then. Didn't excuse his reaction, but might help explain the intensity.
This whole penalty debate, comparing incidents, it really throws that whole F1 stewarding philosophy into question again, doesn't it? The push for consistency versus judging the moment.
That's the core tension, isn't it? Highlighted in all the expert discussions. The FIA, the stewards, they're under massive pressure to be consistent. They've got guidelines, precedents, case histories, trying to make sure similar fouls get similar penalties.
Which sounds sensible.
It does, but the argument is this rigid focus on consistency can sometimes tie their hands. It stops them judging incidents in the spirit of the match, as the Dutch say. Meaning, looking beyond just the rulebook definition, who was where, who hit whom, and really considering the full picture. The context, the build-up, the driver's motivation, the actual outcome. Did someone gain unfairly? Was it dangerous? Was it just clumsy?
So the argument is outcome and context should matter more.
That's what many critics are saying, yeah.
Yeah.
The outcome, did the penalty actually fit the crime in terms of advantage gained or race ruined? And the context, was it an accident, frustration, deliberate? These things should weigh more heavily, but often seem secondary to just finding a comparable precedent for consistency's sake.
Any examples?
Well, Russell cutting the chicane in Monaco to pass Albon came up.
Yeah.
He got penalized, but many felt it wasn't enough because he still gained and kept the place. The penalty didn't nullify the illegal advantage.
Right.
Similarly here, the argument is 10 seconds didn't really reflect the nature of the move, clear loss of control, frustration boiling over, ruining Russell's final laps. It felt procedural, maybe.
So a 10-second penalty for that kind of red mist collision. What precedent does that set? If it wasn't just a clumsy overtake attempt, but something more like foul play.
That's the worry.
Yeah.
That this sets a precedent where actions clearly over the line, born from frustration or lashing out, get a relatively mild slap on the wrist compared to, say, a drive-through.
So teams could use it in future.
Yeah, drivers and teams could point back to this. Look, Verstappen got 10 seconds for that, so why should our driver get more for something similar? It could make policing overly aggressive reactions harder down the line.
But hang on, there's the other system, the penalty points on the super license. Doesn't that play a role?
Ah, good point.
Yeah.
And yes, that was definitely discussed as part of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Max is getting pretty close to a race ban on penalty points.
He is.
Yeah, he's accumulated quite a few over the last 12 months from various incidents. This one added more, pushing him nearer that threshold. And the argument there is that this system, the points accumulation, is actually working. Because while the 10 seconds for Spain might feel light, the penalty points act as a cumulative deterrent. They create a real long-term consequence for repeated offenses. You hit the limit, you sit out a race. No arguments.
So it creates a future constraint.
Exactly. Knowing you're close to a ban definitely forces you to be more careful. So some analysts suggested that because this penalty points threat is looming, the immediate race penalty, while debatable, maybe matters a bit less in terms of shaping long-term behavior.
Does this incident suggest F1 needs to get tougher on aggression generally, especially with someone like Verstappen?
It definitely kicks off that debate again. Some argue his style, especially defending, has pushed the boundaries, maybe changed the sport, and that the FIA struggled to get a grip on it early on.
But there's another side to that coin.
Yeah, the counter-argument is strong too. It's not just on the stewards. Drivers fighting him also need to adapt, refuse to be bullied. Like Piastri, for example. Analysis pointed out Piastri holds his line, fights hard, doesn't just back down wheel to wheel with Max. And apparently Max respects that. So it's a two-way street between competitors, too.
So where does that leave the stewarding balance?
The conclusion from many experts was actually that the FIA might be striking an interesting and maybe good balance right now. Partly because of those penalty points, creating that real threat of a ban for repeat offenders.
Yeah.
It adds teeth beyond just the race day penalties.
Okay, let's circle back then. Beyond the incident, the penalty, the core question we started with. Does this moment show a fundamental weakness in Max Verstappen?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is losing emotional control like that a weakness? Well, yeah, in isolation, any lapse in judgment under pressure is a weakness for an athlete. But the analysis widely agreed this only seems to happen in extreme circumstances for him. When things have seriously piled up, like they clearly did in Spain, car, strategy, on-track fights all converging, it's not a regular occurrence.
And is it tied to his strengths?
That's the fascinating paradox everyone highlighted. The theory is this occasional vulnerability to red mist, it comes directly from his core strength. That absolute refusal to yield, the toughness, the relentless drive.
The very things that make him champion.
Exactly, the things that won him titles, like those incredibly intense fights in 2021. The argument is, you maybe can't have one without the risk of the other. It's not a separate flaw, but a rare, extreme manifestation of the same psychology that makes him so formidable. It's just part of the Max Verstappen package.
Like a double-edged sword.
Precisely. The flip side of that intense competitiveness, you push that hard, that relentlessly, there's always a tiny risk it boils over when everything goes wrong at once. It seems inherent, not something easily coached out.
And comparisons were made to other greats.
Yes. Parallels were drawn to the, let's call them vices, or controversial moments of Schumacher, Senna.
Right. Adelaide 94, Monaco qualifying '06.
Suzuka 90 with Senna and Prost. These guys, often called the greatest, they were relentless, pushed limits, had hugely controversial moments tied to that intense competitiveness.
So the argument is it's hypocritical to slam Max for this but idolize them.
That's the point some made, yeah. Criticizing Max's occasional oversteps while venerating drivers who also had significant negatives seems like a double standard. This tendency in Max, while sometimes causing incidents like Spain, is arguably part of what makes him so tough and successful, just as it was for past legends.
What about the role model argument? George Russell brought that up. Top drivers needing to set an example for younger kids.
Yeah, that sparked a lot of chat. Worth breaking down, maybe. First, the broader point. The sports rules and how they're enforced should set the example.
Penalties show what's not allowed.
Exactly. Stewarding decisions do send a message down the ladder about what you can and can't get away with. That precedent matters.
But the individual driver's responsibility in the moment.
That's where the analysis diverged. In the heat of battle, are they really thinking, what will the F3 kids think? Probably not. They're focused on winning their race.
Right.
The idea that F2, F3 is suddenly full of little Verstappen'S crashing deliberately because of him, largely dismissed. Junior Formula issues are more often about inexperience, learning curves, general aggressive racing in tight fields.
So Russell's comment was seen as
Mostly interpreted as an opportunistic dig. Smart politics, maybe. Puts pressure on stewards, questions Max's composure. But probably not a deep-seated belief about Max corrupting youth motorsport.
and Verstappen's likely reaction.
Probably something like his bring tissues Connet from before.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem overly bothered by external opinions on his style, only by results.
And the historical comparison again.
Yeah. Feels a bit off to single out Max on the role model front when Senna, Schumacher, etc. weren't exactly saints all the time either. Ultimately, it's the FIA's job to police the rules and set the standard through penalties. Plus, it's a collective thing. Parents, coaches around young drivers shouldn't just say, drive like Max, but teach the rules and fair play.
Okay, zooming out from the incident, how significant will this Spain moment be in the long run? For the championship, for his legacy?
The consensus seemed to be,
Yeah.
it's significant if it costs him the title.
How so?
If he loses the 2024 championship by, say, less than 10 points the amount he arguably lost here with the penalty and track position, then everyone will point back to Spain. That's where it slipped away. Becomes a massive what if.
But if he wins comfortably, or loses by a lot,
Then it probably just fades into the background, becomes another data point when people analyze his career. A case study in his driving style, how pressure affects him, not legacy defining, unless those specific points prove critical this year. It's part of the complex picture.
which leads to bigger questions about his future. There's speculation, especially with the 2026 rule changes coming, could this be his last title push with Red Bull for a while?
Right. That came up in some analysis, and we've seen questions about it. If Red Bull doesn't nail the 2026 regs, new engines, new chassis, and rivals like McLaren or Ferrari continue their upward curve.
Could he lose faith?
It's a concern mentioned, yeah. Does the technical department have the flexibility? Especially with the engine partnership changing. If he felt the team was falling behind significantly, could he look elsewhere? Despite the long contract.
We know contracts aren't always watertight.
Exactly. And you can bet teams like Honda linking up with Aston Martin and definitely Mercedes are keeping channels open, letting him know their progress, subtly trying to woo him, just in case he becomes available or unhappy.
But does he chase the number of titles? Or is it more about the present moment?
That's the interesting debate about his motivation. Some argue he's not counting titles like Schumacher might have. He's just obsessed with being the best right now, Saturday, Sunday.
But Spain showed he does care about the Sunday result.
Absolutely. That frustration, the red mist, it came from seeing a result slipping away. It broke that calm demeanor we see when things are going smoothly. So yeah, the race outcome clearly matters intensely.
And his talk about other motorsport, Le Mans, etc.
He mentions it often, leaving F1 relatively early to try endurance racing, for example. Whether he actually will is another question. Perspectives change. But based on his comments and his sim racing passion, it seems very likely we will see him in other categories eventually, after F1.
Okay, let's tackle a really wild hypothetical that popped up. The idea of Max switching teams mid-season, say, to the Racing Bull car, if it was somehow faster on a particular track.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought experiment. Purely hypothetical, obviously, as Racing Bull isn't faster now. But running with the what if, it really exposes the tricky bits of dual team ownership.
What are the rules on drivers switching teams mid-year?
Well, there's a limit. Teams can generally only use 4 drivers per season. That's mainly to stop teams constantly swapping pay drivers. You can usually only break it for force majeure, like serious injury. Switching one driver may be possible under the 4-driver rule, or arguing force majeure if the main cars were unavailable, perhaps. It's murky.
But could F1 or the FIA realistically allow Max to jump to a sister team just because that car was quicker for a race?
Highly unlikely. The experts argue they'd almost certainly block it. Even if there was some loophole, letting a top driver switch between 2 teams owned by the same entity purely for performance. Massive sporting integrity problem.
Why integrity? How does it undermine it?
Fundamentally, the parent company could manipulate the championship. Imagine, design car A for slow tracks, car B for fast tracks. They just swap your star driver into whichever car suits the next race best.
Maximizing points across the board unfairly.
Precisely. It's manipulating the outcome using the ownership structure in a way independent teams just can't compete with. Creates a totally uneven playing field.